Welcome to my continued recap of Convicting a Murderer. Today we're going to talk about episode 7. In 2015, Netflix looked at the case of Steven Avery and their docuseries Making a Murderer. They explored Avery and how corrupt law enforcement made him quite possibly innocent. The series became one of the streaming giant's biggest series. Fast forward to now, Candace Owens on a mission to set the record straight in the DailyWire Plus series Convicting a Murderer. Now, moving into episode 7, I share some thoughts on what intrigued me, break down some of the differences between making a murder and convicting a murderer, and then I'll give you my overall thoughts on the episode. Episode 7's description: the blood vial is not only an egregious example of misrepresentation. There is more to the story when it comes to the bullet with Teresa's DNA. Furthermore, Brendan Dassey's interrogators provide vital insight into the factors that led to his confession. We are seeing an interview with Brendan and how he talked about Steven walked up and knocked on his door. He told Brendan that he wanted to keep doing what he was doing and saying that he wanted to rape and fuck her so hard. The conversation shifts to the cops had talked to Kayla Avery about Steven Avery. At the end of the interview, she tells the people that they should speak to Brendan about things. After they asked if Steven had touched her, she said that Brendan lost weight and kind of wandered off in his mind. The officers talked to Brendan while he was at school, and they thought that maybe he saw something and wasn't saying much about it. He started owning up to seeing things in the fire, and he mentioned seeing toes at other parts of Teresa. They brought his mother in and asked if they could get a recorded version of the interview. They both hopped in the car and went to the station. Brendan said that he didn't see it necessary that his mother was in the room. Basically, there's a big controversy about whether his mom should have been in the room or not. Apparently, his mom was kind of disinterested in being in the room, but Brendan also said that he didn't feel like it was necessary. They basically re-asked him the questions, but this time in a video format, and we see and hear it all. Steven finds out that Brendan was talking to the police and flipped out over it. He mentioned that they should have gotten a public defender because of that, because then they would have left him alone. Furthermore, they put him up for the night talking about Brendan to keep the integrity of the interrogation intact. Now, several key topics, obviously, on the top of the show. Brendan was the first person to mention rape to the investigators, while Teresa was still just a missing person. Why was there a hole in the blood vial? Why did Making a Murderer filmmakers insert the word flatten into their rendition of the bullet testimony? What is the true story of the bullet DNA? And what was Steven's conversation with his father about gun hanging above his bed? Now, throughout this episode, we have a conversation with we hear a conversation between Steven and Glenn, his civil attorney, who are talking about how Steven found out that Brendan talked to the cops and he's unsure what they got out of Brendan. Candace brings up Steven never mentioning a bonfire in any previous interviews prior to this admission. The cops sit back down with Brendan to talk about the case. This is the chat we have used as a potential coercion, seen as a potential coercion of Brendan to get him to say what they wanted about Steven. Of course, he admits to seeing a body and then of course he admits to having sex with the body. He said that Steven told him after he raped Teresa that he did a good job. Now, fast forward to March 1st, 2006, Brendan Dassey is charged in connection with the rape and murder of Teresa Hallback. The entire Brendan confession to the cops was pretty chilling to rewatch. One of the things I personally didn't see was any coercion. It reminded you of a brother situation where you're sitting down with your parents and your parents know something happened and you're finally having to come clean about it, even though you don't want to, right? You know what I mean? It felt like he was snitching on his brother and didn't want to, but felt morally obligated to. And the thing that was crazy to me is when you listen to it, there's details. It's very detail oriented, right? It's not just say, hey, Steven stabbed this person. No, he was very detail oriented in what he and Steven did together. So if there's coercion, it's definitely something where you would see a more straight-laced conversation happening. Instead, we're getting these details that really kind of shocking. Like it's just kind of shock. I don't know. It's creepy. It's weird to hear. You know, I got a daughter, so it's like I don't know. It's just really weird, and I don't know. Steven Avery had rearranged his bedroom, and then of course he took back the rug cleaner. We hear him say, "If I did, there would be more evidence," and talked about how he watched, crime shows for 18 years. If that's the case, man, like you really fumbled the bag here. 4 months after the initial search, bullet fragments were found in Avery's yard. Brennan had indicated that Teresa had been shot in Avery's garage. Upon the second search, they turned things upside down. This time they knew what they were looking for. That's one thing that we talked about in the previous episodes. We talked about how everybody's like, oh, they kept on they kept on clearing everything and kept on doing things. And how did they go in and out so many different times? The thing about it is they were looking for specific items every time they did it. So if they found a specific item, they kind of left. And it's kind of, sure, you could put some problematic ideas of finding certain things upon another search and another search and another search. The bullet recovered had Teresa's DNA on it. The bullet came from the gun that was hanging over Avery's bed. Of course, this is where making murder producers edit out things about the bullet being found, which altered the narrative. They said that they didn't have time. Now, this is the thing that's weird is you get clips here throughout this that we hear the producers talking about the show, and they said they didn't have time to add everything. And the thing about it is, you're right. You don't have time. This is a long case. They had a whole trial. But the thing about it is, why edit it in a certain way? It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Of course, Andy had a problem with the bullet testing. Sherry accidentally got her DNA in the test tube, and that's another strike. But the thing is, Sherry's DNA would have been in it, but it wasn't. They point out the integrity of Sherry by stating that she came out and said that she messed up. Again, that's a perfect key to me. Like, if you are going to just like mess with the evidence, you know what I mean? If you're going to tamper with the evidence, you're going to do stuff. Sherry's not going to come out and admit that she screwed something up. If she did, like if we're planting evidence or tampering with evidence, why would she come out and say this? They point out Steven and Brendan cleaned one specific spot on the floor with gas, paint thinner, and bleach. And then Brandon's pants that he wore the night of everything had bleach on them. As the trial gets closer, Avery's attorneys announced that they were going to blame Lank and Colburn for planting the evidence. They mentioned that they had a vial of blood at the Manitowoc County evidence room of Avery's blood. It was stored in the courthouse. Of course, there was a slight puncture in the blood vial, but it wasn't caused because they planted blood everywhere, but by the person that drew the blood puncturing the cap. They left that part of the documentary. The defense dropped it so that so does the conversation of the blood vial in Making a Murder. The question here is the reason they dropped it is because there was records of who had been inside this box. They were left at the court, and it was Avery's team during him trying to get him out of jail on the initial trial. It was the state who wanted to test the blood, and it was Avery's lawyer that were fighting to get it tested. So this is a definitely interesting piece. We dropped the blood vial. We dropped the hint that there's a puncture in the blood vial in Making a Murder, but then we completely drop it out of the equation because the defense completely dropped it because they knew that if they tested it, it would still be his blood. And then there's that whole, back and forth banter there. There was a record of who had been in and out, like I said, in and out of boxes. The episode ends with the testing of the bones. Andy is questioning Ken where the coroner was. Ken sets Andy straight about the law before the episode ends. Overall, to me, this is probably one of the weaker episodes of the season. We did get a lot of information, some pieces that moved along, some of the stories that we were put together, but it felt so long, and so many pieces just felt kind of drawn out. The editing team probably could have sliced this one in about 15 minutes and fall more in line with some of the other episodes. That said, they continue to give us the information on what we're looking for when it comes to whether or not Making a Murder producers actively left out things on purpose to shift the narrative in their own way. So again, just a real quick recap of what we saw in the filmmaker Making a Murder. The documentary team appeared to interview Avery's family members who think Steven and Brendan are innocent and don't have a prayer in hell. In this, we get Brendan's confession. The filmmaker calls Dolores and Steven Avery in prison, tells him that Steven has her support and sticking by them. There's so many different elements. It's kind of crazy just like scrolling through and seeing the different sides of what happened versus what didn't happen. Um, Man, and Candace said this is one of my favorite. Again, it's weird to say favorite. Brendan said that he had raped Teresa Hall back, and then his uncle told him he did a good job. Like, this is like, how do you even say that? Like, that was just, I don't know. And then another thing she said for Steven Avery, and this is why I'll leave this one with you guys. For Steven Avery supporter, it really, at this point, it is a faith and not a science. And that's, to me, whether you are team Steven Avery, whether you're team he's guilty, innocent, the one thing that we're pointing out here is the consistent inaccuracies of watching and making a murderer versus what we see here. And that, to me, is something that comes to question. Why did that happen? Why did the producers leave out certain things? And I still believe it comes to the fact that they were trying to edit out like a real live TV show, and that's a problem. You know what I mean? So I don't understand. I think that we should have these people answer for these things. But that being said, thank you guys so much for tuning into another episode of me breaking down Convicting a Murder. We'll be back next week with episode 8. I'm excited to hear you guys' thoughts. You guys have been very passionate about this show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to my recaps. Again, love to hear your thoughts, comments. Let me know where I got it wrong, where I think that that divide is, because it's definitely something that has a lot of people talking, and I love to chat about it. So I'll catch you guys next week.